A struggling artist painted a dying man's portrait for free, unaware he just inherited a lost Van Gogh. The words echoed in Leo's mind as he stared at the letter in his trembling hands, unable to believe what he was reading. 6 months ago, he'd been a different person entirely. Broke, desperate, and one rejection away from giving up on his art forever. The late autumn wind bit through Leo's thin jacket as he trudged down the hospital corridor, his portfolio case banging against his leg with each heavy step. 27 rejections. 27 galleries had told him some version of the same crushing truth. His work wasn't commercial enough, wasn't trendy enough, wasn't enough. His stomach growled, a hollow reminder that he'd stretched his last $20 across 3 days. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Leo approached the nurse's station. His sister Mia had pulled strings to get him this small commission, painting a mural in the children's wing. It wasn't the breakthrough he dreamed of, but it would pay the overdue rent that his landlord had circled in angry red ink. "I'm here about the children's wing mural," Leo said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The nurse looked up, confusion crossing her face. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. We finalized that project with another artist last week." The words hit like a physical blow. Leo's vision tunneled briefly, the floor seeming to tilt beneath his feet. "But my sister, Mia Reynolds," she said. "Oh, Mia. She's in room 412 with Mr. Sullivan. She mentioned you might stop by, but I thought it was for a visit, not..." The nurse trailed off, sympathy softening her expression. Leo nodded numbly, turning toward the elevator. His sister hadn't secured him a job after all. She just wanted him to visit her at work. The disappointment sat like lead in his stomach as he pressed the button for the 4th floor. Room 412 was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Mia stood by a hospital bed, checking vital signs, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. In the bed lay an elderly man, his skin pale and paper-thin against the white sheets, with intelligent blue eyes that seemed too vibrant for his frail frame. "Leo!" Mia's face brightened. "I was hoping you'd come today. This is Mr. Sullivan." "Mr. Sullivan, this is my brother Leo, the artist I told you about." The old man's gaze fixed on Leo with surprising intensity. "So you're the painter," he said, his voice surprisingly strong despite his evident weakness. "Your sister shows me your work on her phone. Quite remarkable." Leo shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his empty wallet and the morning's rejection pressing down on him. "Thank you," he managed, shooting his sister a look that clearly said, "Why am I here?" "Mr. Sullivan was just saying how he'd always wanted a portrait," Mia said, ignoring Leo's glare. "Traditional, not a photograph. I don't have much time left," the old man said matter-of-factly. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They give me weeks, maybe a month." He said it without self-pity, as if discussing the weather. Leo swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I've had a full life. Just a few regrets." Mr. Sullivan's gaze drifted to the window, where late autumn leaves spiraled down against a gray sky. "Never had a proper portrait done. Always too busy. Working, traveling, collecting. Never just being." Mia gave Leo a meaningful look. "My brother could paint your portrait, Mr. Sullivan." Leo opened his mouth to protest. He needed paid work, not another charity case. But something in the old man's expression stopped him. There was a loneliness there that Leo recognized, a mirror of his own isolation. "I couldn't pay you much," Mr. Sullivan said, reading Leo's hesitation. "My circumstances are complicated." "He doesn't need payment," Mia interjected before Leo could speak. "He'd be honored to do it." "Wouldn't you, Leo?" Later in the hallway, Leo confronted his sister. "What were you thinking?" "I need money, Mia. I'm about to be evicted." "He's dying alone, Leo. No family, no visitors except hospital staff." Mia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "And he truly admires your work. I've been showing him the paintings on your Instagram for weeks. I can't pay rent with good karma. He's been kind to everyone here, despite everything he's going through. You should see the books he brings for the nurses. The way he remembers everyone's names, asks about their families." Mia touched his arm. "Just do this one thing, please. For me. For him." Leo sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "Fine, one portrait. But then you're helping me find actual paying work." "Deal." Mia's smile was radiant. "You won't regret this." But standing in his tiny apartment that evening, staring at the eviction notice now taped to his door, Leo was already regretting his decision. He had exactly 72 hours to come up with 2 months back rent, or he'd be homeless. With a bitter laugh, he gathered his portrait supplies. At least painting Mr. Sullivan would distract him from the impending disaster of his life. The next morning, Leo arrived at the hospital with his easel and paints. The air in room 412 was stale and antiseptic, but Mr. Sullivan sat upright in a chair by the window, dressed in a proper button-down shirt despite his frailty. "You came," the old man said, surprise evident in his voice. "I said I would." Leo began setting up his easel, trying not to think about the eviction notice. How do you want to be portrayed?" "Just as I am," Mr. Sullivan replied. "No point in vanity now." As Leo began to sketch, a strange quiet settled between them. The old man sat with dignity, his gaze fixed on something beyond the window, perhaps the distant past or the approaching future that everyone pretended not to see. "What's your full name?" Leo asked, breaking the silence. Edward Sullivan." A faint smile crossed the old man's lips. "Though most people called me Ned when I was younger." Leo nodded, focusing on capturing the proud angle of Edward's chin, the way his shoulders remained square, despite the pain evident in the tightness around his eyes. "And you? Your sister calls you Leo, but is that short for Leonard?" "Leopold?" "Leonardo. My mother was an art history professor." Leo's hand moved across the canvas, outlining the basic shape of Edward's face. "Had high hopes I'd be a creative genius? And instead you're painting a dying man for free." Edward's laugh was soft but genuine. "Life seldom follows the path set out for us." The hours passed with surprising ease. Edward spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of a life fully lived. He'd been a literature professor, then a rare book dealer. He'd traveled extensively, lived in Paris for a decade, collected art and first editions. All this he shared in brief, matter-of-fact sentences between long periods of contemplative silence. By late afternoon, Leo had completed the initial sketch and begun laying down the base colors. Edward's fatigue was evident, his complexion graying with exhaustion. "We should stop for today," Leo said, noting the tremor in the old man's hands. Edward nodded reluctantly. "When will you return?" "Tomorrow," Leo promised, surprised to find he was looking forward to it. Despite everything, that night Leo returned to his apartment to find his electricity cut off, another bill he couldn't pay. He worked by candlelight, mixing colors for Edward's portrait, trying to capture the perfect shade of faded blue for the old man's penetrating eyes. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, and Leo pulled his coat tighter against the chill. Tomorrow he would have to tell his landlord he couldn't pay. Tomorrow he would begin packing his few possessions. But for now there was only the canvas, the careful blending of colors, and the strangely compelling face of a man preparing to leave the world. The next day, Edward was noticeably weaker, but insisted on sitting for the portrait. "Time is the one luxury I cannot afford to waste," he said as a nurse helped him into the chair. Leo worked quickly, his brushstrokes confident and sure. There was something liberating about painting without the pressure of commercial appeal, without trying to guess what would sell. He was painting simply to capture truth, the dignified decline of a solitary man, the quiet courage in Edward's steady gaze. "Tell me about your work," Edward said during a rest period. "The work you want to be doing." Leo hesitated, unused to anyone asking about his artistic vision. Galleries wanted marketable concepts. Friends wanted recognizable subjects. No one asked about what he wanted to create. "I paint moments of transition," Leo finally said. "The space between endings and beginnings. Dawn, dusk, the change of seasons." He gestured helplessly, struggling to articulate what drove him. "The in-between times when anything seems possible." Edward nodded slowly. "Liminality. The threshold spaces." "Yes, exactly." Leo felt a surge of connection. "But that doesn't sell. People want pretty landscapes or abstract pieces that match their furniture." "Van Gogh sold only one painting during his lifetime," Edward remarked. "The art that truly matters rarely finds immediate appreciation." Van Gogh had a brother supporting him, Leo countered. "I have an eviction notice and 27 rejection letters." Edward's eyes sharpened with interest. "You're being evicted?" Leo hadn't meant to reveal that detail. "It's not your problem. I'll figure something out." "How much do you owe?" "Seriously, it's fine." Leo returned to the canvas, adding depth to the shadows beneath Edward's cheekbones. "Let's focus on finishing this before—" He stopped, not wanting to say the obvious. "Before I die," Edward finished calmly. "Yes, let's do that." By the third day, Edward could no longer sit up for long periods. Leo adjusted, working in shorter sessions, allowing the old man to rest frequently. Despite his deteriorating condition, Edward remained lucid, his mind sharp even as his body failed him. During one rest period, Edward gestured to the nightstand, the top drawer. Could you bring me the envelope inside? Leo retrieved a worn manila envelope, its edges soft with age. Edward's hands trembled as he opened it, revealing old photographs. Edward as a young man standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. Edward in what appeared to be a gallery or museum. Edward with a beautiful dark-haired woman, both of them laughing. My wife Elaine, Edward said softly. She's been gone 15 years now. Leo studied the photograph. You look happy. We were deliriously so. Edward's voice grew distant. She was an art restorer, brilliant with her hands, could bring the most damaged canvas back to life. No children. Edward shook his head. It wasn't possible, but we had each other, our work, our travels. His finger traced the outline of Elaine's face in the photograph. After she died, I just continued, like a clock still ticking after the alarm has served its purpose. The raw honesty in Edward's voice resonated with something in Leo. Despite the differences in their ages and circumstances, there was a familiar loneliness in the old man's words. The same isolation Leo felt each time he faced another rejection, another setback. I understand, Leo said simply and returned to the portrait. By the fourth day, the day Leo was supposed to vacate his apartment, the portrait was nearly complete. He'd worked through the night, packing his belongings into his car between paint sessions, exhaustion burning behind his eyes. But something magical was happening on the canvas. It was unlike anything he'd created before. More honest, more raw, more alive. Edward studied it with obvious emotion. You've captured something essential, he said quietly. Not just how I look, but who I am. Leo nodded, understanding exactly what Edward meant. The portrait showed not just a dying man, but a life fully lived. The wisdom in the eyes, the quiet dignity, the acceptance. All the stories Edward had shared over their sessions seemed woven into the brushstrokes. It needs one more session, Leo said. The final details, some refinement of the light. Edward nodded, though they both knew his condition was deteriorating rapidly. Tomorrow then. But that night, Leo's phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Mia, her voice tight with emotion. He's asking for you, Leo. The doctors say they don't think he'll make it through the night. Leo drove to the hospital with the unfinished portrait carefully placed in his back seat. The night was clear and cold, stars pricking the darkness like distant beacons. He thought of Edward's photographs, of the life the old man had lived, of the connections he'd made and lost. And he thought of his own life, the passionate pursuit of art that had left him isolated, focused on creation at the expense of connection. Room 412 was dimly lit when Leo arrived. Edward lay still against the pillows, his breathing labored. Mia stood by the bedside, her nurse's professional demeanor slipping to reveal her genuine grief. He's been waiting for you, she whispered, squeezing Leo's arm before stepping out to give them privacy. Leo set up the portrait where Edward could see it, then sat in the chair beside the bed. The old man's eyes fluttered open, focusing with effort. You came, Edward whispered. Of course I came. Leo's throat tightened unexpectedly. I needed to finish your portrait. Edward's hand moved across the blanket, and Leo found himself taking it, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. The old man's skin was cool and paper-thin, but his grip was surprisingly firm. Listen carefully, Edward said, his voice barely audible. In my home, 1542 Maple Avenue. The key is in my personal effects. He paused, gathering strength. In the study, behind the bookcase, a safe. Combination 052173. Leo frowned, confused. Edward, you don't need to. Please. The word was strained. Inside the safe, a painting. It needs the right caretaker. I don't understand. Edward's eyes, though clouded with pain, fixed on Leo's with startling clarity. You what? You will. Promise me you'll go. I promise, Leo said, though he had no idea what he was agreeing to. Edward seemed to relax, his gaze shifting to the portrait. It's perfect, he murmured. You've seen me. They sat in silence after that. The only sounds the beeping of monitors and Edward's increasingly labored breathing. Leo held the old man's hand, offering what comfort he could, thinking of all the stories they'd shared, the unexpected connection they'd forged in so short a time. Near dawn, Edward's breathing changed. His eyes opened once more, surprisingly clear. Thank you, he whispered. For the portrait, for listening, for being here at the end. Leo felt tears burning behind his eyes. Thank you for sitting, for seeing my work when no one else would. A ghost of a smile touched Edward's lips. Then with a soft sigh, he was gone, passing as quietly as autumn leaves falling from a tree. The morning after Edward's death, Leo found himself standing outside 1542 Maple Avenue, a modest but well-maintained Victorian house on a quiet street lined with mature trees. The key from Edward's personal effects felt heavy in his hand. He'd come out of respect to honor his promise, though he couldn't imagine what the old man had wanted him to find. The house was still and silent, preserved like a museum to a life no longer present. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the windows. Leo moved through the room slowly, absorbing the details of Edward's life, the overflowing bookshelves, the collected artifacts from travels abroad, the photographs of Edward and Elaine in ornate frames. The study was at the back of the house, a warm space lined with floor-to-ceiling bookcases. Following Edward's instructions, Leo found the section that concealed the safe. The combination 052173 opened it with a soft click. Inside lay a flat package wrapped in acid-free paper and sealed in a protective sleeve. With careful hands, Leo removed it and placed it on Edward's desk. As he unwrapped the layers of protective covering, his heart began to pound. The painting was small, perhaps 15 by 18 inches. It depicted a field of wheat under a turbulent sky, painted with bold, swirling brushstrokes in vibrant blues and golds. In the corner, unmistakable even to Leo's disbelieving eyes, was the signature, Vincent. A Vincent van Gogh. An unknown, undocumented Van Gogh. Leo's hands trembled as he stared at the masterpiece. A letter had been packaged with the painting, addressed simply, "To the artist." With unsteady fingers, Leo opened the envelope and began to read. "To the artist who painted my portrait, if you are reading this, I have passed from this world. The painting you have found is authentic. A Van Gogh acquired by my wife's grandfather, who was an art dealer in Paris in the 1920s. It has remained hidden, passed down through Elaine's family, its existence known to only a handful of people. After Elaine died, I considered donating it to a museum, but something held me back. Perhaps I was waiting for the right moment or the right person. I believe I have found that person in you. Your sister showed me your work long before I met you. I saw in your paintings what I see in this Van Gogh: truth, passion, and that rare ability to capture the liminal spaces between moments. When you agreed to paint my portrait without expectation of payment, knowing your own dire circumstances, you confirmed what I already suspected about your character. This painting now belongs to you, to do with as you see fit. Sell it to secure your future, donate it to share its beauty with the world, or keep it as a private inspiration. The choice is yours. Legal documentation confirming its provenance and transferring ownership to you is with my attorney, whose contact information is included. Whatever you decide, remember this. Van Gogh painted because he had to, because the act of creation was as necessary to him as breathing. Success, recognition, financial security, these came only after his death. But the act of creation itself was his true legacy. Keep painting your liminal spaces, Leonardo. The world may not understand them yet, but someday they will. With gratitude and hope, Edward Sullivan. Leo sat in Edward's study, the letter in one hand, staring at the Van Gogh, his Van Gogh, as sunlight streamed through the windows. Tears rolled freely down his cheeks. For Edward, for Vincent, for his own struggles and persistence, for the unexpected connection that had changed everything. Outside, the late autumn was giving way to winter, the in-between season, the liminal space between warmth and cold, between growth and dormancy, the threshold of change. 6 months later, Leo stood in a crowded gallery, watching as people moved from painting to painting, his paintings. The previously unknown Van Gogh had been authenticated and sold at auction for a sum that still seemed unreal to Leo. He'd used the money to establish a foundation in Edward's name to support artists and art education, keeping just enough to secure his future and create without the pressure of commercial success. At the center of the gallery hung the portrait of Edward Sullivan, the old man's dignified face gazing out with that penetrating blue stare, all the wisdom and pain and acceptance of his final days captured in oil on canvas. It was not for sale. A young woman paused in front of the portrait, studying it intently. The emotion in his eyes, she said softly, "It's like he knows something the rest of us don't yet understand." Leo smiled, thinking of Edward's letter, of the unexpected gift, not just the Van Gogh, but the reminder of why he painted in the first place. "Maybe he did," he replied. Outside the gallery windows, spring was unfurling in a burst of green. Another threshold, another beginning. Leo watched as more visitors arrived, as they connected with his work, as the liminal spaces he painted resonated with something in their own experiences. Edward had given him more than financial security. He'd given him the freedom to create authentically, to paint the in-between moments that truly mattered. And in those final days together, in that hospital room with its antiseptic smells and fluorescent lights, Edward had given him something even more valuable. The reminder that true art, like true connection, transcends circumstance, transcends even death itself. As twilight settled over the city, Leo stood before Edward's portrait one last time before the gallery closed. "Thank you," he whispered to the painted eyes that seemed to watch him with understanding. "For the inheritance, yes, but more for the lesson. That sometimes the most valuable gifts come when we give without expectation, when we connect across the divisions of age and circumstance, when we see each other, truly see each other, in the liminal spaces between life's beginnings and endings."